Welcome, guys, to our first episode of Formally Informal. I'd just like to introduce the hosts. It's myself, Nikhil Shaji, with Jessica and Bhavna alongside me. And our guest for today is Avneet Hira. Would you like to say hi, Avneet?
Hi everyone, I'm Avneet. It's nice to meet you all.
All right. So I feel like I should give you a quick introduction for all the viewers who don't know much about you or don't know you, in fact. So,
Sure, I'd love
all
to
right.
hear it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but then here we go. Avneet Hira had done her aeronautical engineering from PEC and she graduated in 2013. Following this, she did her MS in aerospace systems and a PhD in engineering education from Purdue University, which she finished in 2018. Following this, she worked in MathWorks as an educational content program manager for a year and a half, and then moved on to MIT as a research scientist for a year. And currently, you're working at Boston University as an assistant professor in
Boston
human
College. Sorry,
Boston
is it
College.
separate? They're two schools.
All
Boston has a
right,
lot of universities. Yeah, so I'm at Boston College.
Boston College. Fair
Yeah.
enough. Okay,
Yes.
and you are teaching human-centered engineering. These are just a few of your accomplishments. Your resume or your list is quite extensive, like from what we've seen. So, what is human-centered engineering, by the way? I've never heard of this term. If you could kindly explain.
Sure. So I mean, human-centered engineering in itself is nothing new. The teaching of it with a focus on the human-centeredness of engineering is what is new with the Boston College program. And what I mean by that is that so when we think of engineering, and I'm guessing because this is a PEC podcast, people here at least give some thought to engineering. Um,
Right.
we often think about all the technical, all the math and the physics that goes in the applied math and the physics and the applied science more broadly, that goes into the engineering of new artifact solutions to problems. But a piece that is often left out in traditional engineering education is the human beings in how engineering is done and both experienced. So whenever
Right.
you're solving a problem, right? I mean, I'll take an example. I'm not a civil engineer, but let's just say we're building. I'm from Patiala. My parents live in Patiala, and they live near. Um, uh, there's a place called Bai Number Fatak. Anyway, so there's a flyover there, right? So there were some civil engineers from the Punjab government who thought about making a flyover there, right? So they would have also considered about what are the communities that live around this flyover? How will they be affected? How will the businesses be affected? But at the same time, they would have also thought about the people who, for whom the flyover would have made their life easier because they want to, bypass Patiala or something like that.
Right.
Um, and on top of that, it's also the people who are doing the engineering, right? So like, was there someone, and these are hypotheticals, I'm not, it's not like I'm aware of that particular flyover, but I was just trying to take an example from Punjab. And there would be engineers who served in the team who might have had certain interests, certain expertise that they were good at versus things that they were not so good at. And so they brought all of themselves into the team when they were solving this problem. So that's what human-centered engineering is. It's an angle to engineering that oftentimes in traditional engineering education we fail to talk about and teach. I think a lot of people do it, but it's not done in an institutionalized way. A lot of my good professors, I think, did talk about the human aspects of engineering, but it's not done in a formalized, institutionalized way. So that's what this program is about. It's a new program. We start welcoming students in the fall. So that's August, September of this year.
All right. So, if I understood correctly, basically you're placing human beings as the priority in this form of engineering, if that's correct. As in taking
Yes,
them.
well, yeah. Well, so I think what we say, and I can at least speak for myself, so human beings are the priority in engineering.
Yeah.
We're just bringing it to the forefront and the teaching of the engineering as well. Because, there's been, and, I don't think there's, yeah. When we think of engineering, a lot of times we always think about what is the next thing, next cool technological or design
Yeah.
innovation that can happen. But I mean, and that's good for a lot of good reasons because you don't always know what problems you're solving and you come up with something really cool.
Hmm.
But a lot of times engineering is also about solving everyday problems. And why are you I don't know, you're making a water bottle. Why is it that it has something over here? Should we put a carabiner here that makes it easier to use? Those sorts of things which often get there used to be a course when I was at PEC called Engineering Design, ED. It was taught
Yeah.
in our first semester. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's still there or not, but I think that
It is,
We
it
was
is.
still have it.
okay, great. Yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, that course, right? The philosophy behind that course. I
Okay.
think Professor
Oh,
So,
all
K.K.
right.
Garg would teach it. Yeah. At least I took it when Professor Garg taught it.
so were you like always interested in something like human-centered engineering, or was it that you while you discovered it with time, so you were like drawn towards it? Like, was it something that you inculcated from your college years or after that?
That's a good question. um, I don't necessarily think so. I think it like went in steps. When I was at PEC, what got me to PEC was aerospace engineering. That was something that I was really interested in. I'm still really interested in it. I plan on teaching higher level electives around unsteady aerodynamics, even in the program that I currently teach in. I'm still use my aerospace engineering in a lot of different ways. Um, but I think it was kind of true because I still remember that when I was at um, with at that point the department used to be called Aeronautical Engineering. I think they changed the name to aerospace since then, but my degree says Aeronautical Engineering.
I
And
think
one of the
the
things, yeah,
batch immediately after you left, it became aerospace, if I'm
okay,
correct.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So I remember because I would, this was like now a lot of time ago, but I remember I was always more interested, and I would say this, that I'm an inner stratosphere person. So like I really care about, even from an air. I mean, I'm excited about space and Mars, and you should have seen me the day the most recent rover landed and things like that. But as my own scholarship and an area of expertise that I wanted to develop, I was always really interested in how can we use there was a lab at IIT Bombay and I used to follow their work a lot. The name of the professor is escaping me, but they used to look at how we could use light transport aircraft for helping reconnaissance missions, other sorts of things within India. So those are the things that were interesting to me. When my third year internship, I was at IIT Madras. It was on a dragon wing flight, but again, that was inner stratosphere, and in such a way that it can help human beings have an immediate impact. I think the other piece, which might have started from PEC, was that um, if I was not in the aero modeling club, making airspace models, or we were making a lot of remote controlled airplanes back then, fixed wing mostly. The other piece that I was really interested in, and I spent a lot of time in, was in SASC. So when I was
Nice.
graduating, I was the general secretary of SASC. And one of the things that I was really interested, the reason I think I was drawn to debating was because you could think through really complex ideas that affect human beings. And that was one of the reasons that I think, I was really interested in debating, because we could think about these things and, use our engineering analytical brains, but at the same time, think about human beings and how they're affected, and, things like that. So I think it kind of started in some way. There wasn't such a thing as human-centered engineering. I remember really enjoying the class that we had taken in ED, and, trying to find things here and there. But I think I've always been a bit more people focused or more social than the stereotypical engineer. So maybe that has something. Also, of course, my parents, so they're both like are very socially minded and service oriented. So I think that has something to do with it as well.
All right.
Okay, so you mentioned IIT Madras, your research experience over there. So, like, could you just throw some limelight on what were your researches about at IIT Madras, Purdue, and if I'm not wrong, MIT as well? Like, how
Yeah.
did you make it to MIT? Like, honestly, like
Yeah.
to
I
hear
mean,
it
I
as a
think
PEC student, that how, like, did you ever envision that you will actually make it to MIT? Like, was that on your bucket list or maybe a goal someday?
No, and I mean, I don't mean it as being offensive. Like, I don't mean to. I had a great time working at MIT. I think there are some great people there, at least the ones that I worked with. And in general, the research infrastructure is really unparalleled to like a lot of other schools that I've had the privilege to work at. But maybe so. I guess I'll. So you wanted to know my research trajectory, right? I think the one thing in common is that I was always interested in research. Sorry, Nikhil, were you saying something? No.
no, I wasn't
Okay.
actually.
All right. All right. All right. I think the one thing that's in common is that even when I was at PEC, I always knew that I wanted to do research and get into research. So all my internships, so I interned at IIT Madras, which was also part of an Aeronautical Research Development Board project. And then I did a summer internship at DRDO, so the Snow and Avalanche Research Center, which I think is in Chandigarh, Mohali, whatever, somewhere over there. But I was always interested in asking questions and developing new knowledge. I think that's kind of what drove me to do research as opposed to having doing industrial internships, which was, I wouldn't say was the norm, but it was what a lot of other people were doing if they were not doing research. And so when we came into our third year, I'd applied to a couple of different, I think it was IIT Bombay and Madras, I want to say. So it was that professor I was talking about earlier, whose name I'm forgetting, their lab, and I had applied to IIT Madras, where I worked under Dr. Sunetra Sarkar in the Aerospace Engineering department. And that to me was the first time that I spent a semester doing just research. And it was Chennai, and it was hot, and the lab didn't have an AC. And, this is kind of the first thing that I remember. And we would work on these machines that were running, really large code, and it would get even hotter in the room. I was working on a Lagrangian flow solver for unsteady aerodynamics, so something to mimic dragon flight. And the ultimate aim was to kind of make a micro aerial vehicle off that. But I was working on the aerodynamics of it, the flow solver part of it. And I think, of course, I think we eventually got a conference paper out of it at some point, but I learned that research was hard work. I also perhaps learned that, research is a fairly solitary activity, and the more community you can find in it, the better. So there's someone in my batch, Nishchal Jain, I'm forgetting where he's at right now, we could probably find him. So Nishchal and I both interned in the same lab together. And I think, I don't know what you'll have to say about this, but I think if Nishchal and I didn't have each other to bounce ideas off of, I think that experience would have been even more solitary, even more lonely. And you're in this position where we just wrote MATLAB code all day and tested it. And just when we were waiting for the code to run, we would maybe go around, do something, and then we would be back. And it was even though now that I explain it that way, it might sound sad, but I was actually fairly happy there, other than the heat, just because it was like, oh, I wonder what happens if you do this. Oh, I wonder what happens, if you change the coefficient of lift. I wonder what happens if you change the wingspan, these sorts of questions. And we could just code it in and see what happens. And that was really exciting. And the professor was really great as well. In fact, she was the person whom I was telling her what grad schools I was going to apply to. And she was like, these are all party schools. Do you want to apply to some real schools? And she was the one who recommended I apply to Purdue. And I was like, do you think I'll get in? And she was like, yeah, apply. So anyway, that's what I did there. They did kind of similar unsteady aerodynamics work, but on cryospheric wind turbines. So basically icy wind turbines. That's what I did at DRDO. Then I went to Purdue, and I got really interested in systems and how larger systems, both of airspace navigation and other systems that matter in navigation and aerospace in general, how all of them come together. I think it was the thinking about systems and how human beings play such an important role in the systems. There's a way of modeling which is called agent-based modeling, and oftentimes when you do agent-based modeling, it's the hardest to code human beings as agents because you don't know what they'll do, right? There's not binary or even any sort of like a deterministic way to often code human beings into an agent-based model. And so that's when I was like, so are there people around here at Purdue who think about how human beings behave and why they do what they do? Is that something that is here? And the other piece that I was always interested in was making. So I was making aero models at Purdue, and I was looking for places to like make things, and 3D printers were new and cool back then. So I met my since PhD advisor Morgan Hines in, I want to say, an elevator or something. Like his office was in the same building as the aerospace department, and we started talking. And then I went to an open house for the department, and I told him that I was interested in making things. And he told, and I told him that I don't know why it's fun, but it's fun. And I feel like I learn a lot because when I was in PEC, I spent most of my time in the aero modeling lab. So and here I am, at Purdue, and I didn't have the best grades. I think I graduated not with a 9 point, I think an 8.6 or something when I graduated from PEC. And I think it was really the aero modeling experiences, in addition to, of course, the research experiences that got me here. But I want to understand, why is this fun? And if this is fun, can we make this into learning? And he was just setting up a lab at Purdue. He had just gotten to Purdue as an assistant professor, kind of the same career trajectory where I am right now. He said, I'm setting up a lab and we're going to get a bunch of machines, 3D printers, laser cutters. And, I plan on conducting research on the same topics that you're talking about. So if you want to come volunteer in my lab, that'd be great. And, he was able to also provide for a research assistantship for me. So I worked with him for a semester. And that's when I was like, dude, I want to do a PhD in this because this is so interesting. I would love to present it as if, it was, I made a list and it was pros and cons, and it was a very well thought out decision that, I didn't pursue a PhD further in aero and I moved to engineering education. It was very passion oriented. And it was also, I think, and I've shared this at other places, which is that I would meet a lot of people at Purdue in aerospace, both in aerodynamics and systems, who I thought were just way smarter than myself, who were really good at solving aerospace problems. And where I think I could have been and I think I'm an okay aerospace engineer. I could do, I could solve fairly complex, but not very, very, very complex optimization problems and things like that. I found myself in the makerspace asking these questions as I am the right person to be asking these cutting edge questions in the engineering education space. And so that's, I think, that was the biggest thing that made me make that move, that if I'm not the best person to be asking and answering these aerospace questions, then let the best people do it and let me do this work instead. And so then I worked on, makerspaces for education, which is basically around, we're making and it's fun, and what is the learning that's happening here? Is there engineering learning that's happening here? And, asking those sorts of questions. And that was, part of my PhD. We did a lot of work with students in middle school and after school settings. We did a lot of work with teachers who were teaching these students. I also did work with adult people who are working in makerspaces. In fact, someone who I used to work with at PEC, Sahil Thapa, he was a couple of years senior to me. He's a professor at National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad now. And yeah. Sahil and I connected, and he had put me, I guess I'm just trying to highlight how PEC in one way or another was just kind of part of this journey, right? And Sahil and I were just chatting the other day, and we were thinking of doing some research together now because we actually do similar work. So yeah, I was there. We haven't gotten to MIT yet, and I've been talking for a really long time. But do you want me to keep going?
Oh, yeah.
We're 2 steps away. Okay. So I graduated, from Purdue. There was another piece that was kind of important at Purdue, which was that I really got involved in a nonprofit, which is, if people from PEC are listening, they would be interesting maybe for some people. It's called SPEED, the Student Platform for Engineering Education Development. So the idea is that it's engineering for development, but students work in their local communities to solve problems using engineering, but with the support of and having a community of other students across the world. When I was part of it, there were over 20 countries that were, part of this. And, we would go to different countries and do these student forums. And it was great. I got to travel a lot, but also got to meet really, like-minded people who are really excited about engineering for society. And I think that's also where some of the human-centeredness had started to kind of trickle into my, the way I was thinking about things. Anyway, so then I was close to graduation, and I think I would lie if I say that I always knew I wanted to be a professor or, wanted to be an academic. I wasn't sure. I just knew that this is fun to me and this is exciting to me. What is it that I can do that I can have the most impact doing? And I had met my boss, my manager at MathWorks at a couple of conferences, and she's great. When we think about women in STEM and when we think about the importance of having role models and managers, especially, there's such few women managers in STEM in engineering fields. And, it's a shout out to PJ Boardman because she was really great. We were talking, and, I kind of realized that maybe because I mean, if you're not aware, MathWorks is the company that makes MATLAB. And throughout my engineering curriculum, my engineering career experiences, MATLAB had been a constant. Like if you're an engineering student, most likely an aerospace engineering student, you've used MATLAB for almost everything that you've done computationally. And so there's an opportunity to work on her team as the person who would work with educators at universities and sometimes schools who were using MATLAB to teach problem solving, open-ended, project-based learning. So that was a really exciting position. It was, very fun. I got to meet a lot of great people who wanted to do a lot of good work. But what I realized, which was funny, was that when I would talk to researchers who were researching engineering education and they would be using MATLAB, and so I would be talking to them to understand, how we can make the software better, or just to learn how they're using MATLAB to teach better. I found myself, and I would try to control myself. I found myself wanting to tell them, well, have you considered this research question? Have you considered doing the research this way, or have you considered doing? Because I was no longer a researcher when I was in the corporate at MathWorks. And then I was like, yeah. So I was like, so this is what you really want to do. Like you're like, this is cool. This is fun. It's, much more well-paying than most, academic life can ever be, really. But you really want to keep asking those questions about learning. So why are you pretending? Why don't you just go back to doing that? And at that point, I, looked around, and there was an open position at the lab at the Education Arcade and Scheller Teacher Education Program, which is the lab at MIT that I worked at. And I interviewed, and they were really nice about taking me on board, even though I wasn't coming right out of a research background. I'd spent about a year in industry, but they took me on, and we worked on a project which brought project-based learning to high schools across the United States as part of a network of high schools. And that was great. We got to work with teachers. It was also around the same time that the pandemic started last year. So we had to make a lot of changes to do a lot of our research online. But I, worked with some, probably, some of the smartest people I know research-wise. Actually, that's not true. I feel like everywhere I go, I find, really, really smart people who think of research in really interesting ways. And, that was true even at MIT. The cool thing, though, at MIT for me was that I actually worked with people who had been teachers. So two of the people that I worked on my team, and which is kind of interesting because, we do a lot of research telling teachers, hoping that, this is the right way to teach. But I think we can do a much better job as the, society of people, community of people who do my kind of research, actually spending time with teachers because they have so much on their plates. So I worked with two people who had each had a decade of teaching experience. One of them was a history teacher and the other person was an English teacher. And, it was just great because I was like, yeah, you guys have to think about all of these things. And now we're trying to tell you that you should teach engineering in this way, or you should be teaching science in this way. So yeah, so that happened. And then, some of the Boston College opportunity came up, and I didn't have any plans of leaving MIT anytime soon, but this was an opportunity where they were starting a new department to offer a bachelor's and undergraduate program in something that was really close to my heart of human-centered engineering. So it just seemed like the right move. This is also MathWorks, MIT, Boston College. They're all in the greater Boston area. So geographically, I didn't have to move too much. Also, pandemic. So I've basically sat in this chair and I've had 3 jobs. But I'll stop there. So that was the journey.
Wow, that's crazy. Balma, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, it feels like all of your time you listen to your heart rather than running after money. So weren't you like scared when all of your peers were running after money, they were getting all these high paid jobs, and here you were listening to your heart and following your dream? And I know it's like a very tough job to do, but weren't you scared at times? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You guys are like so deep, man. Like you ask really deep questions. What is human-centered engineering, and now this one? I think it comes with a lot of privilege. So I think at least, not until recently did it even occur to me. I think it was when I was leaving MathWorks and coming to MIT, that was the first time I actually thought about money briefly. But before that, and that probably had to do with the fact that corporate jobs just pay so much money. And I think my friends who did MBAs knew this, and I didn't know this. And that's why maybe I'm just kidding. I remember when I got my offer letter for MathWorks, I was like, oh, really? This is how much money I could have made if I would have just done an MBA. Anyway, no. So I think that it was just never a consideration, and I recognize the privilege that comes with that, right? Like it was never a consideration for me to have to get a good paying job right out of PEC. I didn't. It was not. I didn't. I mean, till date, I don't have to provide for anyone. Maybe my cat, even that, right? Like my husband and I both work, and we only provide for a cat. So like, it was just never. When I graduated from PEC, it was not a consideration. This eventually I got a research assistantship, and these might be the types of things that people are interested in. My first semester for my master's, I did not have an assistantship, so I actually taken a student loan in India to start off. I had a feeling I'd be able to get an assistantship, but that's a question that a lot of people ask themselves when they go to the US, Europe, or wherever to pursue their master's and PhD. PhDs oftentimes are funded, masters sometimes are not. And so like my family was just really good about this is what you want to do with your life, and so we'll figure it out. And so my dad was the person who actually applied for the loan. And I mean, I think I lucked out that after a semester I found an assistantship which pays for, and maybe these are things we're interested in. So it's usually assistantships in at least the United States will pay for your tuition, so that takes away a big chunk of what usually your financial burden, but it also pays like a little bit of a stipend, which is usually just about enough, maybe a little less than to like live okayishly. It also depends on where your university is. So Purdue is in Indiana, where the cost of living is much lower than, say, if you're in California or even, in the Boston area in Massachusetts. Even though I think the stipends that you get are a little bit higher, but they're not high enough. So someone who graduated with me, a good friend of mine, Ansuya Luvalia, she was and she was a PEC grad, so that's why I'm mentioning names. She was at UCLA when I was at Purdue. And even though her stipend was a little bit more than me, her rent was like 2 or 3 times more than me, like her apartment rent, right? So like it doesn't quite even out that way. So I think I was lucky in that sense. But the PhD, I think the other thing is that, everyone just makes the same amount of money, so it doesn't matter. So like when you're in the program, now, the people that I met, everyone just made, like the same amount of money, whether it was friends I would, meet somewhere. Between departments, it's a little bit like, I think computer science or nuclear engineering, at least at Purdue, maybe made $100 or $200 monthly more than us, but, just slight things like that. So you forget about it, right? You might see on LinkedIn, like I would see people who became VPs at consultant firms. And I was like, I'm a student and this person became a vice president. And, and then you learn that, it's a different sort of a career trajectory and doesn't quite work the same way. But you have enough people around you who are poor and sad, but still really passionate about what they're researching. And so we keep going on. When I quit my job at MathWorks, it was a consideration. And I think, that's where, and I was talking with a colleague of mine, Boston College, who's a sociology professor, and she was also telling me that there's research around this, which is the effect that men can have on their partners, if it's a female partner, on their career trajectory. So when I quit my job at MathWorks, my husband and I had the conversation, and he was like, well, I have a stable job, so this is okay. We'll figure it out, right? When I moved to MIT, because it was not only was it significantly lower pay, it was also these research projects are often funded on what we call in the United States soft money, and what that means is that you're given money to do research, but it ends at a certain point of time. Then you need to get more money to keep doing research. So it's not like you have a job and it'll stay forever. So there's like a fair bit of risk involved, and I kind of from my family support or whatever, like, from my partner, he was like, we'll figure it out, right? We'll take care of it. And so this is, if any slightly older than you guys, people are listening, I think this is probably something for partners to also think about. You can support each other's professional lives, by just being there, being supportive.
It's really sweet.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's, but I mean, it's good to, I think it's important to think about money. It's important to think about what, I think it's important to feel secure enough, because then you will do things that, that you can follow your heart. If you are not sure where you're going to make rent for next year from, or your mortgage or whatever, right? Then then it's a problem. So I don't think I've been in a position like that. Then maybe I wouldn't have followed my heart.
All right, fair enough. So, actually, I want to ask you about your cat. If I'm right,
Yeah.
I know it's like a complete tangent.
No, I was trying to
But
look for her, but I don't know where she is. Yeah.
right, but what I've heard is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard you were allergic to cats and yet you keep a cat. Is this true?
Yeah. Wow. Where do you guys stalk me? This is ridiculous. Okay.
We do our research pretty well, right?
Yeah.
Are you impressed?
So I am slightly allergic to cats. So there's like a scale, something IG that has something in your blood, and so my whatever comes less than point 0.1, and point 0.1 is supposed to be minor allergies. So it's not terrible. But I
Okay.
didn't know I was allergic to cats when we adopted her. So we adopted her now about 2 years ago. And she was 7 years old. And she's just really cute. And I didn't even consider that I could be allergic to cats, just because I had friends who had cats, and I never thought it was. I mean, I always have seasonal allergies, so I didn't think it was the cat, and that was making my nose feel funny. But then we got her, and then my allergies got slightly worse. And I went to the doctor, and I remember this allergy specialist was trying to like threaten me. It was like, you need to get rid of your cat and blah 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 blah. So and so basically, yeah. So she's not. What I realized is that it's really bad if she like sleeps in the same bed as me. So we just keep her out of the bedroom, and it's mostly okay. And we have HEPA filters. Yeah, so I think we have like HEPA filters running in the house because of the cat allergies. But I would still keep the cat
I'm sorry,
because
what
she's
is the
really
HEPA
cute.
filter?
I mean, just air filtration. HEPA is like an industry standard or whatever. But just yeah, it's
Oh,
also
right.
what they recommend these days for the. I don't know if it's good enough against the coronavirus, but that's something at least schools in the US also run in their classroom. Just air filtration, the same kind of filtration system that a lot of most commercial airplanes have.
All right. I mean, like, I'd recommend just not keeping a cat, but then I don't know, like, I can't judge
I
in the
mean, well,
first
we
place.
already got her, right? And she's really
Yeah.
cute.
Fair-
Also,
Good enough.
we're
That's
living.
superb reason.
Also, we're living in a pandemic, and and I don't know, what your experiences have been, but we've
Yeah.
been very much social distancing, and mostly
Right.
staying
Yeah.
indoors and haven't been hanging out with other people. So she just makes living
Keeps you
indoors all the
company.
time. Yeah.
And like, actually, since we're speaking about the pandemic and social distancing and stuff, how is the condition exactly in the US? As in, I don't know, according to whatever I've seen or whatever I'm pretty sure everyone's seen, it's not looking too great with all the protesting and the people not taking rules and the enforced rules very seriously. So could you like tell us a bit about that also?
So I think what you're talking about was a concern and an issue some months ago, last year. Uh, I'm not aware of any at least big scale protests that are happening. Also, I mean, like the US is very like things and rules are very different state-wise. So I live in Massachusetts, so I probably can't comment on or will not be as familiar with what's happening in I don't know Iowa or Arkansas, or, even
Cool.
California for that matter, right? But it's I think it's like a lot of it is on your personal what like personal mandate, like what you're doing yourself. But to step outside, there are rules by at least the city that I live in, that you need to have a mask on. Even when you're running outside, you still need to put on a mask when you're running and things like that. Which, if people are still think that you can't run with the mask on, I will show you how. So if you're running outside, put on a mask, please. It really does not make a difference. And I'm not even like that great a runner, and if I can do it, you can do it too. But okay, back from my public service announcement. It's I mean, I guess you can see the numbers. It seems like I think the numbers are going down recently, both severe
Yeah.
cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. So that's kind of nice. But yeah, I mean, the university is taking all the precautions. There's still social distancing. People are wearing masks. We get tested on a regular basis. All of those things. When you can work from home, we work from home. We only go in if we need to go in, and all of those things are there. I've been lucky enough to not have anyone too close to me to have been affected very severely by it. But I have family in Michigan. So my husband's family is in Michigan near Detroit. And My mother-in-law is a social worker in a hospital, so we were really concerned because Detroit at one point was the epicenter of a lot of things, and so but she's been vaccinated, so that's nice. And yeah, it's I guess it's similar, but I think in India you have fewer cases, so it's a little more scary here, maybe. I don't know.
Few cases, as in we're not aware as well.
I
It's
don't know.
probably some fault with reporting. But regarding the pandemic, you said you've been doing work from home like everybody else, obviously. But how is teaching being, or from the point of view of a teacher, how has online classes and online learning been for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't taught any undergraduate classes online yet.
Yeah.
I've been part of some teacher professional development, which we did online, and then just the usual like seminars and webinars and conversations, like those sorts of things. It obviously comes with its own set of challenges. I was doing a presentation yesterday, and it's really hard because I need to know how people are. I need to see people's body language and facial expressions and stuff when I'm making a presentation, because otherwise you're just kind of talking monotonically, and that's usually not how I like to do it. But I've just been really amazed. I actually did some research on this. I have a paper out, another one will be out in a couple of months, on how school teachers are responding to the pandemic and teaching through it. And it's just it's crazy the amount of care and how much over than what is usually expected of their job responsibilities. Like teaching in itself was a pretty noble profession to start off with, and now they're doing even more. That taking care of their students in whatever way they can online. I think that's really great. And where of course there's probably plenty to complain about. This is not, at least ideally for me, I wouldn't love to only meet people this way. I would have loved to meet people in person. But the fact that we can do this is pretty great, though. Like I think the marvel of technology, of internet, right, of band, like all of these things, that we're actually able to do this is pretty cool. And I think it's made a lot of people, at least in the research community or in general, I think in the world, has made a lot of people reconsider, or at least think about their work from different angles, which I think is interesting and good. And in the education space, people often so this okay, I'm without dissing on anyone. there's this sentiment oftentimes that, okay, so I don't have anything against startups, but I think there's something to be said about there's something to be said about being an expert in something and then trying to create a company around it, right? So it's very similar to my experience that I said, we used to research teachers, but then I got to be on the same team with teachers, and I really learned what their issues were, right? So I think that's kind of similar. So in online learning, you'll hear from people who are into startups that, and I've heard this even just passing, right? It's not an area that I'm very plugged into, is that EdTech, so educational technology, is the new hot area to make startups in. And I just like, if anyone's listening, or I just think that if new technologies are being made, we should really consider the people who actually end up using them. So how are the teachers really using your edtech platforms that you're making, right? Like don't necessarily only make edtech platforms so that you can sell them to someone else, right? And then move on to make something new and cool. Because like real people are involved here, right? And these teachers are probably making like 1/4, 1/5, or even lower than that money than you. And they still like work probably longer hours than you. So making technology and just expecting people to figure it out, I think, is unfair. And I think the other piece that I was trying to say was that there was a sentiment that, well, now you can just learn everything online. So why do we really need universities? Why do we really need colleges? And I think the pandemic has shown us that that's not true.
Yeah,
right? Like
definitely.
it has shown us that where you can do a lot of things online, which is great, right? Like I'm all for blended learning models. Even when I used to teach at Purdue, there were certain things that the students would watch online lectures for, but in class we would actually make things together, design things together, have conversations, right? So I'm all up for those kinds of blended learning models, hybrid models. But thinking that you can completely replace education by something online, we're not there yet. I mean, I don't think we'll be there yet, at least in my lifetime completely. I don't think so. But we're certainly not there just yet, even though, there are lots of, startup ideas that assume that now everyone can just read online because you can download an app and you can, read the summary of a book in 2 minutes. Did you really read a book if you just read the summary? Like, I don't know. Like, yeah, I'll stop there before I say more mean things.
No, that's fine.
As in,
I wanted to ask you at Purdue University, right?
Mhm.
So, is there like something of a football drinking culture, and are you a part of it?
I think there's a big football culture at Purdue. So in the United States, college sports is huge, right? So like the way people in India will watch cricket, whether you're sitting in a restaurant or a bar, with your family or whatever. In the US, there's a similar culture around sports, including college sports. So they have different divisions: D1, D2, D3. I'm actually not too familiar with it, though I should be, because actually Boston College is a D1 football team as well, and they really take their football seriously. So I need to learn about it. But I think so was Purdue. Like even Purdue is a big footballing school. Um, there's something that they call tailgating, which I think is like people get together and have a little party before the game starts. I have actually never been to a tailgate. I should have, because I was at Purdue and now at Boston College. Maybe I go to a tailgate, but I have not. I have not been to one. There was another thing at Purdue that used to happen. It was called Breakfast Club, which I think this is what you're getting at, which is either before a football match. I think when we played home games, or even Purdue used to do F1 racing, so students would make their own Formula One cars. And, they would kind of actually maybe it wasn't F1. It was racing of some sort. Maybe I'm confusing it with FSA at PEC actually. But anyway, so people would make cars. They would race it around a circuit. PEC had Baja. I need to get my facts right. People make cars and race them around circuits, right? And
right.
and so Breakfast Club was that you would wake up, and this is no, I don't think this is written anywhere other than blogs or Reddit or something, that you would wake up like 4 or 5 in the morning and go to the local campus bars and get really drunk before going to the football game or to the race, the F1 race or whatever it was. I actually never went to one. And people who knew me back at PEC will not believe this, but it's true. I actually never went to, because I think it was just too early. I think I was just like, getting done at 2 or 3 the night before. And so waking up at 4 in the morning to
Or
get drunk to then do something else just never seemed like something that, I always wanted to, but I
doesn't
never
seem
did
like
it.
it doesn't seem like
who
a
wakes
wise
up to
life
drink?
decision, huh?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, but
Yeah.
it looked like fun, because then I would, later come out and I would see, and people would dress up and it would be like a fancy dress thing. So, I would come out on the streets and I would see these like really drunk minions walking on the pavement on the side of the road. And you can tell that these people did Breakfast Club. So it had definitely had that culture, right? And I mean, it seemed like fun, and, whoever was into it, it was cool. But I don't have anything against it. I just never got into it. I just never found myself doing it for some reason. The other thing I did perhaps participate in, and something that I liked about Purdue, at least when I was in my early 20s, now it doesn't feel as fun anymore, was they used to have something called Thirsty Thursdays. So whereas in India or other places people would be like, okay, so we go out drinking on Fridays or Saturdays, but at Purdue it was like, but it's Thursday already, like we can drink now because it's Thursday. So it would be always funny, especially when I would teach, on Friday mornings. If you were teaching a class, you could tell that, these students were out on Thirsty Thursdays. So, but I thought it was great. I think Thirsty Thursdays in that age, at that point in my life, like, it seemed like a fun idea. Because if you're going to do it on Friday, why can't you do it on Thursday? Now I don't think so, because I don't think I'll, make it to my meetings the next morning.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Sorry.
there's another thing at, sorry?
Sorry,
Yeah,
no, you
continue.
guys continue.
Yeah. So there's another thing at Purdue, right? Like a tradition of sorts that people, they drink a whole round in a bus or something.
Is there?
Something like that,
I
right?
don't
Oh,
know.
wow.
I mean, I think these traditions are very, so in the US, most schools have these drinking traditions. I don't know of this one, but I'm sure they have something. The
I
most
like
recent thing
how
that, yeah, what?
I like how Bhavna knows so much more about these drinking traditions about Purdue
She did
than
her
See, I did my
research.
research on you.
yeah.
Yeah, she did her research.
I
I
have
mean,
very
they're like
nice
these,
talking skills.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know, people threw these like parties where like, people would bring in like kegs of beer and you would, do, I don't know. Was never able to do it, but I've seen people do it, like where you'd stand on your head and drink beer out of a funnel. It was kind of ridiculous. Like, I think the one time I tried, I just like, I don't like regurgitated within a second. So I never really tried it. But yeah, like, I think all college campuses have their, fun interesting traditions. The last thing that I knew of Purdue, which I thought was kind of interesting when I was visiting, this is after I graduated, I think one of the local breweries made a beer which for Purdue or something like that. I think they were either getting their hops from one of the schools or something like that, but it was called the Boilermaker Special or something like that because Purdue people are called Boilermakers. So I thought that was good. It was also a nice beer. It was a wheat beer. It was nice.
Nice. So now I'll digress from this, I'd say, this vibrant discussion that we'd had to ask a very genuine question that I think you did your MS in Aeroscience from the year 2013 to 2018 or 17, I guess, and
I think
simultaneously you did your PhD that started in 2014 till 2018. So in India, I don't think we have something that has like an integrated system to pursue both the degrees, but I guess the Western countries have that system. So like you did your PhD as well as MS at Purdue, like simultaneously, mostly like there were
So
three overlapping.
yeah, so sorry, I was writing this down to clarify. So that's mostly right. But actually, so I finished my master's in 2015. So I did my master's in 2 years. So I started my master's in 2013 and I finished in the summer of 2015. So I took 4 semesters and a summer to finish that up. And I had started my PhD, in 2014, and I finished that in 2018. So there was a 1 year overlap. And yes, I mean, you can, and I mean, I'm not saying the way you described it, that can also be done, but that's just not what I did. I kind of finished my master's and then, more full-fledgedly got into my PhD. It basically comes down to credits and how you divide them. It also comes down to what area that you're doing research in. So in my case, I was taking courses in both aerospace and engineering education. In that 1 year overlap, I was taking courses in both fields. That's why I took the extra summer to finish up my master's, because I was taking some engineering education courses as well. So that was a stupid year. I can't remember the number of credits that I took, but it was just really high. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And then I finished up my master's, and then I was completely into the PhD. With the PhD, though, at least your last 2 or 3 years, you really need to only be doing your PhD, because that's when you're coming up with your research proposal, you're defending that, and then you're collecting data and you're writing up your dissertation, and that sort of a thing. A lot of people, what is more common is that people will enroll for the PhD, and in getting their PhD, they will get a master's out of it as well, because they've taken enough credits to get a master's degree. So you need, for example, if you need 30 credits to get a master's degree, you probably have taken 50 by the time you've finished your PhD. So you can use those 30 credits to get a master's. And a lot of the people that I knew who were, for example, getting PhDs in mechanical engineering or something did that. So, in the middle at some point, they got a master's. But it's I don't know how useful or not useful that is. Maybe it is for some jobs. I'm not sure if this was true. I think I'd heard in India to apply for some professor positions, you need both a master's and a PhD degree or something like that. So maybe that's why people do it. But a lot of people some people also do a bachelor's degree and then do a direct PhD and don't get a master's in between. And they seem to be just fine too. In fact, usually, if you apply for a direct PhD and you get in, that means, you have funding and you can just keep working on your research. That's usually for people who are pretty sure about what they want to conduct research in. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you're not 100% sure, because then you're signed up for the next 4 or 5 years to do that. My husband Tanmay has a direct PhD, so he has a bachelor's degree and then a PhD. So I always make fun of him that I have more degrees than him, but that's actually not kind of true, because he was smart enough after his bachelor's to get in directly into a PhD program. So I think can be done in a few different ways.
And while we're on the topic of PhDs, if I'm right, towards the end of your PhD, as you mentioned earlier, you have to present your research project or your dissertation. So you mentioned defending this.
Yes.
So how does that work? How does this process of defending your dissertation work?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a presentation, but that's the words that people like to use. Well, there's something cool about it, though, right? It's the idea is that this is your work and you defend it. So like research, and especially getting a PhD degree, one of the big things is this idea of developing self-authorship. So I am now an independent researcher who now has the expertise and the competence of asking valid research questions and finding answers to them. And so even though, there's a kind of colloquially you say that, if you're advising students, so like, now I will be advising students as a professor, if your PhD student starts, asking you questions that you don't have answers for, or you run out of questions for them, that means they're ready to graduate because they've now carved an independent scholar identity for themselves. So
Right.
I think that's maybe where at least to me, that's what it felt like the defense part comes from. That this is my work and I'm going to talk to you about my work, and then you can ask me questions and I'm going to defend my work. So at least it felt like that. And that's actually when you kind of feel that you're ready to be done. Like I still remember like that, last semester at Purdue, I was like, yeah, like ask me anything about this. Like I am the person to give you these answers because no one else has asked these questions in these ways and I've found answers in the entire world the way I have. And I'm sure everyone else who has a PhD feels the same way about their research because even though it's a tiny thing, right? There's no one else who's gone that deep into this tiny thing the way you have. And, another kind of colloquial thing is that the more research you do, and especially people who have PhDs, the more likely you are to say that I don't know things, because the more deep you go into something, you realize that everything has this level of depth that you can go into. So, you're less likely to think, or I mean, I'm making a generalized statement, but I can at least speak for myself. Like when I graduated from PEC, I might have been saying, yeah, I know this and I know this and I know this. And when I graduated from Purdue, I was more like, I know nothing. I know about these 3 questions that I asked with my dissertation. And those 2 were situated in time. They were situated in the communities that I worked with. And, they were backed up with the literature that I looked at. So that's all that I can really claim to know. Everything else is, wonderland. And I would love to learn more, but I don't claim to be an expert in it.
But it must be like a really good feeling, yeah, being an expert on a particular topic. And like when
Yeah,
anybody tries to
for a day.
like
And then you're like, sorry, what you're saying? Anybody tries to?
no, as in, like if anybody tries to, argue with you, or you'll be like, nah, no, you're wrong, I'm right, I know, I'm certain. Like, just having that confidence, that must be pretty cool.
It's so fun you bring that up because I'm gonna use it as another opportunity for a soapbox. Anyway, it's so I think it should be. I think expertise is valid, and I think expertise is something that people around the world should think about. And, if people are thinking, at least I personally, if I know that someone is an expert in something, I listen to them. And if I
Definitely.
have a question around it's one of the reasons that I love universities, because to me it's whatever, like 5 mile by 5 mile, or whatever 2 kilometer radius area where you can literally find an expert on any question that pops in your head, which is amazing to me, right? But what I was trying to say earlier was that it doesn't always happen that way, especially if you have a PhD in something that everyone else thinks that they know a whole lot about. And I'm not discarding, people's opinions and experiences. I think they're all very, very valid. But, when you have, say, a PhD in something like engineering education, and, you're talking with people who have degrees in engineering, I think they have valid things to share from their respective experiences. I don't necessarily think they have valid evidence-based research claims to make, which is what we do as researchers. But people oftentimes forget that. And I haven't necessarily, I think, just because of the communities I'm part of and the people that I meet, it doesn't happen so often with me, but I've oftentimes seen people's expertise being questioned, especially if they're women. And a lot of times it's also that, oh, you think you know better because you have a PhD. And I'm not saying I know better because I have a PhD. I'm just saying that if you had 10 years of industry experience doing something very particular, right, I would consider you an expert in that too. So I think expertise, whether it comes from getting a PhD, doing research, work experience, right, whichever way, expertise is expertise. And I think, it should be something that should be considered that way. We do have a problem, I think. Definitely I can say for the US, because I've been living here for a long time. And in general, I think the world and India as well, where depending on who is wearing the hat, their expertise is thought of as differently. So I come across as younger than most professors that people would think of. And if I am speaking, it doesn't always, people will not always think of it as she's really an expert or knows what she's talking about. Like, fine, she got a degree. But I'm not even trying to preach. I'm just saying, oh, this is the thing that you're talking about. I know a few things about it, but it's it's mixed up, and it's, I don't know. That's all I'll say.
All right.
So, like, have you had moments in your life when you failed at something, or you just lost
all the
something that you
time.
really wanted? Yeah, so how did you like face or got up from those moments when you fell down?
You just pretend it didn't happen. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. That's very bad. That's a joke. I mean, you can look away for a second, but then you need to kind of like come back, and I think you forget sometimes, right? Like, there are things that, are you talking about like professional things, but then you also said lost something that, like, what do you mean? What do you want me to say or comment on?
Both of them, like professional and
Or
anything
maybe
Because
else
like,
that
Bhavna has
you feel
ulterior,
comfortable sharing.
like, motives to her questions. So I think it's, yeah, like, I mean, it probably started with even getting into PEC, right? So like, I didn't first get into PEC. I was what people would, what's it? I got into PEC by the defense quota because my dad has a gallantry award.
whoa.
So I mean, that in itself was to start off in some way a failure of sorts, right? Because I was so sure I wanted to do aerospace engineering at PEC, right? And somehow got along to doing it, but right. So then when I was in SASC, we would lose debates all the time, right? Which was like low level, right? I'm talking about low level because that's what at least PEC losses felt like. And when we were making those remote controlled airplanes, I don't know if they still have that lab. It was at the top of what used to be the IT department, but I think you no longer have an IT department. So I can know it's the building across from the computer science department. So over there, and we would spend hours and hours, weeks and weeks making airplanes, and then they wouldn't fly. And that would always be kind of sad, because you spend so much time building the airplane and the engine wouldn't start or something, right? Or you messed up the wing, or the balsa wood or something. So those sorts of things. And when I started applying to grad schools, I didn't get into a lot of the schools that I applied to. It's interesting. Go back to your earlier question. I can't remember if I applied to MIT. I definitely applied to Stanford and I didn't get in. Maybe I did apply to MIT, but I can't remember. It was a long time ago. But there were several other schools that I applied to that I did not get in. I mean, just with with research is all about failure, whether it's in the doing of the research, because you try something out and you're like, oh, this didn't work. And that happens all the time. I do research on people making things and creating things, and I make things myself, just around the house or other places in my lab and stuff. And there's failure in that all the time. And the entire research enterprise is about, whether we like it or not, it's about publishing your research to get peer reviewed. And there's a lot of failure in the peer review process for good reason, because it makes sure that our research is good when it goes out there. But sending something out and you get these responses back, and if you're familiar with academia, people will always say reviewer 2. So that means, like 3 reviewers looked at it, reviewer 2 has the harshest of comments. And it's just like a funny thing to say, but one reviewer will basically make you feel like, what are you doing with your life? And that happens all the time, right? So you guys mentioned we're talking about my accomplishments, and I'm guessing part of it was probably you looked up at my publication list, but each one of the publications out there was probably rejected 1, 2, 3 times. And even at the time when it finally got published, it probably got scathing reviews, and then we worked on them and made them better. This morning I woke up to an email about a paper that I was really looking forward to presenting, and I guess this wasn't that much of a failure, and they were like, fine, but come do a poster, we're not going to give you time to do a complete presentation. And this sort of stuff, happens in academia all the time. And yeah, my current professor, so my current position as an assistant professor in the US, we have something called the tenure track. So that means you work at the university for 5 to 6 years, and then you apply for tenure. If you get tenure, then you kind of have a permanent position at the university. But it's a extremely competitive process of getting tenure, and you're kind of running against something that doesn't have, if someone tells you these are the 5 things that you need to do in these 6 years, and then you will definitely get tenure, and it doesn't work that way. So you're continuously kind of running against your own last best thing that you did, and you keep doing that. And so I think, yeah, very often professionally, very, very often, and I wouldn't necessarily say that I've gotten better at it, but one of the things that I'm actually really interested in actually researching as well in makerspaces is how do we reframe failure as a moment for self-compassion. And it's something that I'm kind of trying out in personal life as well. But also, I think it's really interesting. There's plenty of evidence from psychology to merit the exploration. But I think that's something that's interesting, because something important to know is that you don't need to. And this takes a long time. I wouldn't even say that I've completely actually actualized this in my own being and sense, but I know at least theoretically that now, after whatever, I'm almost 30 years old, that which is probably not that old, but whatever.
It's not. Don't scare us. It's not old.
But what I think what's important is that you don't need to justify or do anything special to deserve having the life that you have. You really don't. I feel like we're always taught, and I think all systems are the same way, but at least the Indian system that I'm familiar with, that if you don't get a certain amount of marks or whatever in your 10th standard, your 12th standard, you don't get into this college or whatever, you're not good enough. But the fact that you exist, life is hard, especially life right now is really hard. So really, you don't need to do things to prove your worth of being a worthy human being. The default is that you're a worthy human being. If you go do something that's illegal, then you're not a worthy human being. But that's different. Even then, I'll take that back. Even legality has its own gray areas, right? As long as you're not hurting other people, other lives, you're fine and you're a worthy person. So let's start from there, and then take things on, whether that's failures or successes.
That's absolutely right. So
Can you tell I just
okay.
read the Oprah book? I think that I did anyway.
Okay. So you mentioned this maker spaces for education twice, and I think I'm not aware about what that is. So if you could just give us
Yeah.
information about what that is.
Actually, you are. It's just that we use different words. So I actually really got interested in makerspace. I just didn't know that they were called makerspaces. But we did shop class in PEC. You guys still have shops like auto shop, woodworking, forging, all of those,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
basically makerspaces are like fabrication labs. So you go in and you can create things. That's what a makerspace
Oh,
is.
all right.
And it's kind of, I was talking with a colleague here, and I was telling them how when I was in, talking highly about PEC, I was like, when I was in undergrad, we were working in shops when we were in first year, right? With our freshman year, we were working in shops. And that's kind of what a makerspace is. I think the newer evolved versions of them have, where I think at PEC, we have a woodworking, a forging, and that's a good thing, because I think at least back in my time, they were pretty advanced facilities for what you could do as an undergrad. In makerspaces, oftentimes you have a lot of these different types of fabrication facilities in the same space. There's also the virtual or the coding aspect to it. A lot of places are also called hacker spaces. So there's people who come in and code things, and these days there's a interesting mix of the two. So a course that I'm planning on teaching, I'm trying to see if students always want to make apps. Whenever you ask them to solve a problem, everyone wants to make an app. So I was talking with a colleague of mine, and I was like, fine, let's let them make apps, but they really have to make apps then. So we're going to try to get a setup in our makerspace here where they can actually test out their apps and actually learn app building. Because there's one thing to just draw it out on a piece of paper and say, button here, done. That to me is not an engineering project. So basically a place where you can come together and build things, and you have technologies to help you build those things. They don't have to be expensive technologies. It's whatever you need. But yeah, I loved shop class and manufacturing at Purdue. At PEC. Those are probably my they're all P's. But I'm talking about PEC. It's probably one of my favorite classes, along with ED, which I mentioned earlier. I remember Professor Dinanath would teach the course, and then we had all the other technical instructors in the. We had all the other technical instructors in the shop who were just great. Like I loved auto shop. I remember I'd done electrical shop for my summer, but I had such a good time.
Actually, while we're on the topic of club activities and makerspace and stuff, I just wanted to ask you, did how did all these? I'm assuming obviously you've picked up skills from these clubs while participating in them. So have you seen these skills come directly affect your professional life or your work life or your personal life for the matter of fact? And can you like give us
Yeah.
instances? Basically, like
I thought you'd never ask. This is when I go off talking about SASC, which of course, like I think clubs are the and the Ed board, but it's and the Aero Modeling Club. Sorry, just like, but yeah, I love it. There's a little paper airplane right behind me there. But anyway, I think it's for me they've been really, really, really important, right? And it's I think I think I've spoken plenty about aero modeling and making and how that kind of, so that was obviously one part of it. Aero modeling played a really big role in my life. It still does to date. Actually just talking with some high school students here who want to do some drone making, and I'm excited. And even though the technologies have obviously changed, but I can talk about, so back in our day we would fabricate them this way, which is kind of cool, right? But one of the big things that I think I use till date, at least try to use till date, is how to communicate well, but more in the sense of like how to make a good argument, not argument for the sake of an argument, but if you want to communicate something that you really think is true and you really believe in, how do you communicate that? And that's something that I learned with debating, which is part of SASC, at least when I was there. Also, there's something to be said about like whenever you're in college, there were plenty of, for good reason, there were plenty of things not wrong, but there were plenty of like not so great things about SASC, just like there were about other clubs as well. And it was the case in our time too. So I'm not trying to say that everything about that club is great. I think we made a lot of mistakes, and so did everybody else as well, both in the recruiting and how we were as people around other people. And that was all. Many of those things were messed up.
Feel free to you feel free to like mention a few of those mistakes. We'll edit it out of the final this time.
I mean, I think like as general as a campus, we were very sexist, and I think that we like now Nikhil's like, you asked me, I said it. So and I think and I played into it. Like I'm not even saying necessarily that people were sexist against me, which they probably were, but I think we didn't do anything to. I mean, I didn't do anything that I can remember to. Kind of challenge that. I think we played into it, right? So like where we heard of, like, oh, this person should be recruited into this club because she's pretty. Like I don't remember standing up against it at any point. Like I remember standing up against, like there was this, without naming any people, like finally when I was general secretary in my 4th year, someone was not cool enough to be in the club. And I was like, are you kidding me? Have you heard him talk? Like he's such a smart guy. What do you mean by he's not cool enough? And this person is doing really well for themselves. And so I think that is really the only time that I can think of where I might have stood up against these cultural norms that were built in to the club culture, the campus culture at large. But of course, I'm not saying this is a PEC specific problem, right? Like PEC, the university, whatever, the campus reflects what the city and the country and the world is like. And it's so that was one of the big things that I think was problematic, which I think even now, like I think finally, I'm just so glad that I'm forgetting their names. I remember one of their names, but the women scientists who work at JPL and NASA were part of the Mars mission, and you probably saw the news that went around. There's so many other women from PEC who have accomplished so much in technical fields, but I don't see the names often. I really don't. And I think, that to me is something that's concerning. In fact, sometimes when, sometimes juniors will reach out to me now and be like, hey, do you, could you help us with this? And we've already spoken with these 5 other people. These 5 other people are always men. And I'm like, but there are these 10 other people, or at least 5 other people for women who've done more than the men that you're talking about. So why don't you get in touch with them? And I think it goes both ways, right? I think we as women alumni also don't do such a good job at like staying connected and projecting our work, but that is also for good reason. Like women are taught not to project their work in certain ways, right? So like I think there's a lot of those kinds of things. But your question was about clubs, so I'll come back from my sociological commentary. But so yes, I think SASC, how to make, because when we started parliamentary debating, and I was from the batch, so it was 2 batches senior to me when Webam Nangia was the secretary, that we started parliamentary debating at PEC. I think I was in second year. So we did parliamentary debating. So that was the first time we did Trivium, if Trivium is still happening. So when I was Secchi, that was Trivium 3.
It's still happening.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So when I was Secchi, we did Trivium 3. So, just to kind of some history. So to me, that was the time when we started seriously thinking about how do you make a good argument. You come up with a construct, but then you need evidence to back up your constructs. I remember talking with my debate partners. I would debate a lot with Anish Nangia, who I'm still in touch with, and Kriti Tripathi. We would debate quite a lot together, and we would talk about what are our 5 constructs. The first one is weak, the second one is really good, this is the evidence we're backing up our constructs with, right? And this form of thinking in kind of like a team format, I think like to date, like when I write papers, I think about what is my argument, how am I backing it up, what is the evidence that I have to back this up, right? Writing in general, like writing is a big part of my current role as a researcher, and both SASC and the Ed Board in some way they've provided an opportunity to be writing. Again, I think there were issues. I think there were issues with writing is so subjective, so is talking, and that I think that if you wrote in a certain way and you thought in a certain way, you were considered as cool or less cool. But I think there were still opportunities where you could be writing and publishing, right? I remember doing these Dream Compass. So Dream Compass used to be part of SASC, but I think something happened. But when I was there, we used to do Dream Compass, and I remember the first time when I just wrote without, I got one prompt, we saw a video, and then we just like wrote all day after being inspired by that video, and that was amazing. Like sometimes I use that to write even now, because when you write a lot, you get writer's block often. So I'll just look at a piece of data, and then I'm like, okay, now just write. And the first time I did that was part of a Dream Compass or Verve or something like that. So those things, I think and the people, of course, I think both from the club culture in general, but PEC, still in touch with a lot of the people, and I carry them with me to date. Hopefully, I think I do.
So moving on, now I think I just have this question. So you talked about how losing a debate was like at that point in time, that was a failure. And now that you've come, let's say, 10 years ahead in your life, now there's a whole new spectrum of a whole new level of problems that you're facing. So while you were at PEC doing aerospace engineering or aeronautical engineering, as you say, so what sort of life did you imagine for yourself 10 years post it? And now when you look back, do you see that you sort of satisfied that I would say that inner undergraduate inside you, or maybe you underachieved or overachieved? Obviously, you did overachieve according to a lot of us, like, and in general as well, like such a great trajectory of professional
Extensive
work.
resume. Yeah.
Exactly. What do you?
I don't know, like it's funny, I say, like I'm really, if you think about an academic career, I'm really just at the start of it as a researcher, but I can see that it's depends on where you're standing and how far you're watching out or something. Also, in general, like this area of education and STEM education is interesting to me. Research is one way of getting at it. I also teach a lot. I also volunteer quite a bit. So those are all the different ways that I get to education, and matters of diversity and inclusion are also really important to me. But that wasn't your question. Your question was about, I don't know. So I don't think I ever looked at what I would be like 10 years from then. Like very honestly, in fact, I think it was just yesterday or something, like I was just thinking about, like I was like, did I ever think I'd be, and this is not even a professional perspective, right? Like I'm just kind of like sitting in my apartment. Currently I live in Cambridge, and I was like, did I ever think I'd be living in Cambridge? Like, no, I never even thought. Like, it wasn't a thing. But I'm like, oh, so then did you think something else, and you're not doing that? And the answer to that was also no. So I think, but good or bad, I'm one of those people who usually has a lot of things going on in this moment, which, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And I think the pandemic has kind of thinned those things down. So I don't look too far out in the future, other than the obvious looking far out. So, at PEC, finishing the degree, at, Purdue is, finishing up the PhD, and, those sorts of things. In fact, maybe I need to do that now, because, this is kind of more real life, and you're kind of like, all right, what do I want to do now? Where do I want to see myself 10 years from now? And, those sorts of things. So I don't really know if I would say that I've over, under, or as much achieved. I just did things that I thought were fun and interesting, and I was in a position to do. And I thought I was, a good person to do some of those things. About failure, because I think that's, kind of how you had framed your question. I mean, I think no, like, I don't think, at least I hope, right? And it's much easier to say things than actually do them. But I don't think any failure in particular is something that would make me think like, this is the worst thing and you can't get back from this, unless it's like a failure on something moral, or like something like about it. Like, I think the things that I give myself the most crap about is that I know that a friend needed me at some point, and I was just too busy with my own things, and I wasn't able to be there for a friend or a family member. I think those are the things that stick with me as failure. Not getting into a school, or not getting something published, or not winning something, it feels pretty terrible in the moment, but I don't remember them. You get over them, I think. So I think even looking forward, I think it would be important to me to not fail at like taking action when I see something wrong that's happening and I'm in a position to do something about it. Like, that's something that's important to me. And it's one of the reasons that, I think being an educator is a good place to be able to do that.
And as you mentioned a bit a while ago, actually, about your deciding your goals for the future, how you don't plan too far ahead to the future and stuff. But you do plan things, obviously, like what to do next, or that's fairly evident. So, like, I just wanted to ask you about your, how those plans go about. Like, how do you decide your next goal, for instance? How do you start working on it? Or
Yeah. Sorry, my
maybe
cat
like,
is here, and because you had a question about her, I'm gonna
sure, feel
show
free to, yeah.
you my cat. This is going on YouTube. I think
Hello.
she needs to sign a photo release form or something. Okay. Yes. But I got your question. I wish these things. I wish I had a process. I wish I could like give you an algorithm or something, but I don't. The one thing that kind of stuck with me, which is something I was talking with a friend about some number of years ago, and I think I like the sound of that. I don't know how much I actually use it. Is that it would be nice to not necessarily live life with a map, but with a compass. And what I mean by that is that not necessarily have exact stops or plans that, you'll go from here to here to here to here to here. I've never done that. The few times I've tried to do that, I've never really gotten things. But on the other hand, if you know that there are, certain values, qualities, experiences that that are important to you, those are things that you can think of as the directions in your compass, right? This is the general direction that I want to go in. So I generally want to be doing something which is related to, like, I often think about work as like, we're living in a world that is increasingly engineered. You look around, everything is technology, right? To me, anything that's made by human beings, but fabricated, is some form of engineering, some form of technology, right? And so how is it that we can live well in this increasingly engineered world, right? Where we're making things, but how can the things actually keep giving us happiness and purpose and connection? And that's kind of, that to me is a very broad way. So that's my current compass, right? And in that, I bring my own area of expertise and interest. I'm interested in education. I'm interested in building certain types of things. how, and that might change over time, right? I might realize that I need new sets of skills in general to meet this broad area or goal. And I think it's good to have goals that you can't achieve in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because then it would be really boring. Like if you achieve, like then you'd be like, what do I do next? And I've been there where I've perhaps had much shorter term goals, and I've been really sad when it ends. And I wouldn't, and I'm sure everyone has their own way of engaging with these things, but to me those things don't work very well. Like I've tried that, right? Like it's like, I really, want to, even, materialistic things. Like I really want to buy this. It would be great if I could drive this car. It would be great I could do this or that. But then you get it, and then you're like, all right,
Now
what do I
what?
do now? Yeah, and I'm not
Yeah.
even that rich, but like still, like, I mean, I'm not rich at all, but like still, it's not it just doesn't give me that much happiness per se. But if you can have something more broad, I think that's cool. I do
Right.
something
Like,
which is called reflective practice. Like it's very similar to like journaling, like just kind of thinking about like why you're doing what you're doing. So I like have little reminders for myself to just kind of be like, just list the things that you're doing currently that are interesting, right? Like where are these things taking you? Um, I relate a lot with the adjectives of space and warmth. So like, whatever you're currently working on, can you find spaciousness in it, and can you bring a sense of warmth to it? And these are things that like, if you're working really hard, you're working 10, 12-hour days, and you forget. And so it's good to kind of come back to it and, bring the warmth. Like all of this is reflective for me, right? You're asking me questions that I probably never asked myself, but I'm like, coming up with some answers. So kind of something like this, but being reflective, I think, is important.
and how often do you do these moments of like introspection?
It's so there's like what I would like to do and what I actually do. um, I have I think I have reminders for every week with a different question. Like not every week is not a different question, but there are 2 or 3 of these questions that I just said, and they're kind of dispersed over a couple of weeks. But I think I end up maybe doing it once in 2 or 3 weeks, where I actually sit down and write and think about it. But a lot of times it also happens, you can feel it that it's done. Like if I'm talking with someone, like I just did this, so like I'm not gonna reflect for the next couple of weeks because I've like already said a lot of things that were probably like bubbling at different places in my head, or if you've had a good conversation with a friend or a family member. So it doesn't have to be in a written form, but I think I can feel, if I go 3-ish weeks, 4 weeks, getting to 4 weeks, and I haven't had a time for implicit or explicit reflection, I can feel it, and I need to like then write things out. Yeah.
Right. Just make sure you're on the right track and like why you started, whatever you commitments you started, just reminding yourself basically in a sense. Yeah.
That, yeah, and I also think it's a form of creativity for me,
Hmm.
because there's like so many interesting things, right? Like the self-compassion and failure thing, right? Like I learned that from my meditation practice, but I think it's like so interesting, and you can bring that into engineering, right? So like there are these different connections that your brain needs space to form, and
Hmm.
you need kind of like an open space to do that. So I think it's good for that as well.
All right. Fair enough.
So Avneet, do you have like some words of wisdom or some kind of advice for our viewers?
Didn't I give so many?
Yeah, like
What
something that,
more wisdom?
Of course. I mean, like, I don't think there's
something that people our age should not ignore, like how people just run after money right now.
all things
That's
people
something
our
they
age
shouldn't
should
do.
ignore, or like,
I mean, I think, if money is important to you, you should totally run after it. Otherwise, you'll be sad if you don't get the money, right? So, like, I have really like nothing against what people like. You just, ask yourself what is really something that could bring you joy. And, these things are so hard because so many things happen in hindsight, right? Like, you might think something's going to make you happy right now, and it won't once you get it. And that's okay, because you have more years to live, and you can go chase the other thing that you want. I think something that maybe is not really a word of wisdom per se, but I think just something that comes to mind right now is that I think it's important to recognize that there is always space to do the right thing. Like, even though we feel that, we're in constraints in different ways, there usually is space to do the right thing. And if you can't do it yourself, you likely will have community that you can reach out to that will help you do the right thing. I mean, I think history teaches us that there have been plenty of people who did not have the space to do the right thing. I think we're much better off generally as a civilization where a lot of us have the space to do what we think is the right thing to do. But even more of a reason to just kind of not be a silent bystander, right? Like if you see that there's an opportunity where there's the right thing that can happen here, like act. I think that's something that's important. The other one is, because I know this was somewhat career focused ish, in some way this podcast is that you can really, it's factually incorrect if I say you can achieve whatever you want to achieve, because that's not really true. So I mean, because a lot of people can, if you're privileged enough to be in a position where a lot of things, you don't have so many questions in life, you don't have things to provide for, and you have the right kind of backing up, you can. But that's not true for a majority of the world. So I kind of push back on when people say things like you can achieve whatever you want to, but you can try and then you might achieve some part of it. But wait, I think there was another thought there though. It was about excuse me. It was about if you have something in mind which is interesting, especially like a bachelor's, sure, like when you get into a bachelor's degree program, you think that this is a specialized degree, but once you're done, you realize that you have a lot many years to live, and you have to create your life in ways that is interesting to you. So don't be too concerned if you have the space to go after what's interesting to you, right? So whether that's finance or research on a particular topic, whatever that is, right? So social enterprise, something like that, whatever that is, follow it. Like someone from PEC was recently talking to me who wants to do video game design now, and I think that's great. I have worked with video game designers here who have all sorts of backgrounds, right? Like I know people who have literally no background in STEM or engineering who are now developers and coders who work at companies like Google and such, right? Because they realize that they want to become a developer at like 40 years of age or something. So I think what I'd say is that as long as you're willing to work hard, most likely you'll be able to at least achieve something in the direction of what you want to be achieving in. And I say this because I know that there's probably students at PEC who are listening to this. So I wouldn't necessarily say this if I was I don't know, at a I don't know, a different place. Like I think the very fact that people are at PEC tells me that there's some amount of privilege, both in their personal backgrounds, but also the fact that you're in an institution which has excuse me, educators, connections, alumni who are at places who can help you. So reach out, right? And so that's something that I'd say. Sorry, not very clear cut, but that.
Okay, so one thing that you would like to say to the current PEC students, that something that we should not be missing out, that something that you took away from PEC.
I don't know, man. It's just like, sorry, what? It could be like?
It could literally be anything, like just a small virtue maybe, or maybe one experience of yours that curated your think of.
I mean, like I've already spoken a lot about the, club experiences and stuff. Some of the courses I think I've already mentioned that were really great. I think there's a certain amount of freedom that comes with being, at PEC or I think most bachelor's degrees. So like if you, I don't know, if you have questions, pursue it, right? Like I think that's what I would say. So like when I was, for example, when I started at PEC, we actually did not have an aeromodeling society. So we started it. And so we weren't necessarily given this here. Now you can be part of, like, how, I don't know if you guys do it now or not, but at orientation, the different clubs would go up on stage and tell people, this is our club, this is how you can join us. So we didn't have that for aeromodeling. There's ISTE, Aero, and those sorts of things, but we were like, we really want to build these things. So, ask for things. I think that's maybe one thing. And ask for things, and most likely some professor, someone might be able to find you some money, some pocket of money somewhere, and or reach out to alumni or something like that. But if it wasn't excuse me, if it wasn't clear in what I've already said so far over the last almost 2 hours now, is that I am someone who really likes to have fun with what I'm doing. Like, to me, that's really more important than most other things. And I think I had a lot of fun at PEC, and I would kind of suggest the same thing. And whatever that fun means for you, right? It could mean, like, I don't know, playing Counter-Strike in the hostel if people are still doing that, or whatever. Like, whatever that is, like, remember to have fun, because otherwise it just gets really boring. And yeah, I think that's important.
Speaking
Well,
of
that's
Counter-Strike, sorry.
you will continue.
Speaking of Counter-Strike, I actually had to mention one of the Ed board members who was part of your batch told me to say you hi, tell you hi. Do you remember Davis?
Oh yeah, of course. When I was talking about we started the Aero Modeling Club and all of that, yeah. When I said we, I meant Davis, myself, Sahil, whom I earlier mentioned, and Darwin and Varun. Okay, I got all the names. Yeah.
Yeah. He had
Yeah.
actually mentioned he had told me to give you his regards and stuff because he was one of my sources for
He was your
information.
source. Interesting.
One of my sources. Yeah.
Yeah, he just got married, I think. Yes, I know he did. Yeah. I hope he's doing well. We haven't spoken one-on-one in a while.
He's doing fairly well. He's doing fairly well actually. I spoke to him today actually, for that matter of fact. So
that's cool. It's cool that both of you took out the time to do that.
yeah. I mean, Bhavna, Jessica, do you guys have any further questions, by the way? Because I feel you mentioned we've reached like almost 2 hours, and you mentioned earlier that you're going house hunting. So
I have a maximum of 9 more minutes, but if we're done, I would also be happy to be done.
So can you tell us if we missed out on anything, or is there something that you want to tell people?
Nothing in particular that comes to mind. I think the last, couple of questions were kind of that open-ended, what do you want to share with people? Yeah, I mean, really the big thing, I think one of the things that I have done, not always, but, something that's important, and I said this earlier, is that reach out. Like, I remember when I was applying for those third-year internships, like, I emailed so many professors, I emailed so many people, and like now maybe email, people have actually put filters and they don't even see them, but like reach out through LinkedIn, see if there's a connection. Is there someone who graduated from PEC whom you know in LinkedIn, who maybe worked in their lab or knows someone who worked in their, like, reach out. And you don't lose anything when you reach out. I think, that's something that's really important. Literally anything, any big kind of transition that I've made in life, right? Like the things that you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast conversation, interview, whatever you want to call it, all of them happened because like I kind of reached out to someone. I was like, hey, could we talk about this? And when I sent out that one email or that one message, I probably sent out 5-10 other ones too, and I didn't get those responses. But that's okay, because you forget. I don't remember whom I reached out to, but I remember the one that made a difference. And kind of the same way, like I've always really benefited from mentors in my life, whether that's professors or just senior students, and other like more informal sorts of mentors. And even now, like when I was accepting the offer at Boston College, I'd actually reached out to a PEC alumnus who's a professor at a school, Kokul Jaika. She's a professor in Singapore. And these are all these, you can reach out to people, and people will help. Most of them will. And but of course you should be in a position, you should be ready to do the same when someone reaches out to you. But that I think is important.
Yeah, but like on LinkedIn, what we see here is that people don't reply, that's there. But a lot of us don't know how to make a good LinkedIn profile. So do you have any pointers for that?
Yeah.
I'm not your person. Like, I don't even know what's on my LinkedIn. And only because it's not for my area of work, it's not the place to go, right? Like, I'm more usually concerned about what my ResearchGate profile is looking like. I made a link, like I know I have an active LinkedIn now, but I really don't even know what I put on it other than my most recent place that I work. But I know it's important. I know it's important for areas of work, but not really for what I do. So you need to find someone who works in industry for your next podcast, and they'll tell you.
Actually, before we end, you mentioned your ResearchGate profile.
Profile.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, like, just for those students who are planning on
Yeah.
following research, maybe you could just give us like a quick rundown of what would be appreciated in that.
Yeah, I mean, so like there's ResearchGate, there's academia.edu. I mean, there's also just Google Scholar. Like it's like, in academia, usually people like to see what are you currently writing, what are you working on, what is your area of expertise, and that usually comes across by the papers you're writing, the conferences that you're presenting at, and other things. A lot of academics also have their own websites which you can go to, but they're also not as often updated. They're not very regularly. Mostly, they're not regularly updated. Some people do it really well, but a place like your Google Scholar profile or your ResearchGate, they've kind of an automated system where they find your paper. So like it's very little work for me. So I'll just get an email saying, we found this paper. Did you write this? And I'm like, yes, great. And they just add it to my profile. So if someone is, like for example, I just joined a new university and they want to know, what does Avneet really do? What is she interested in? Then they can kind of look at my profile and they get a sense of, what I do. In fact, it's kind of neat because I got an email most recently from ResearchGate saying that, and you get these emails when people cite you. So in research, that's kind of not the entire point, but sadly, kind of. So people will cite you, and I got an email saying someone from Boston College cited you, and I just joined Boston College, and for me that's who is this person? Can we collaborate, right? What are they doing? And so then I saw it was someone who is a professor in the College of Education, and I reached out to him, and we just spoke last week, and we might get to do some work together. So it's a almost social networking plus research sort of a place, and something that other people do on ResearchGate, and I need to start doing, is that they'll not just publications, they'll also put the projects that they're currently working on. So if you're interested in seeing what projects a professor you want to work with, a researcher is currently working on, they might have it up on their profile. People use Twitter a lot too in academia. I don't, but that's maybe another place too. If you're really interested in someone's research, you might want to follow them on Twitter and stuff.
Fair enough.
Okay. So is there like anything else, Avneet, that you want to share with us?
No. If you keep asking me, I'll keep coming up with random stuff, but like the quality of the stuff is yes.
Is there anything you guys want to ask? Go ahead.
No, I guess we can end it on a high note then. I mean, it's been a great conversation, to be honest. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. We wouldn't have even thought of such a cool idea from your perspective to do this for your peers and other people at college. So thanks for doing this. I don't know if you made the right decision by making me your first interview person, because I thought it was something around alternate career paths, and to me, getting an engineering degree and becoming an engineering professor doesn't sound like an alternate career path, but I guess maybe it is. But yeah, good luck with all the things.
Thank you so much.
It was really great talking to you, Avneet.
Yeah, thank you for coming, by the way. Like, you could have just said no.
Thank you for giving us your time.
I couldn't have said no because Ishita Arora, we should mention her name since she did all the hard work.
Yeah, thank you, Ishita, when you're eventually watching this podcast. So.
All right, thanks. Well, take care. Bye.
You too. Thank you so much.
Okay.